Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Mark Cooper, and together with Dr. Ovid Vitas, we are the co-chairs of the history group. I know there are some people here who are new to the history group. We welcome you, and we welcome you to the club. If you see things that you like, if you're interested in joining us, and we hope that you will, you contact me or anybody else who's got little things hanging from their name tag, and we can get you the information to do that. Anybody who has any device that makes noise, like a phone, whatever, and I'm guilty of it, please turn them off so that we don't interrupt our speaker, who is going to be giving us a very entertaining program. Today in history, in 1917, on this day, Congress passed the Jones Act, which made Puerto Rico a United States territory and its inhabitants United States citizens. Some people in our present government seem to be unaware of that. In 1923, on this date, in Italy, Mussolini stated that women have the right to vote, but, he said, the timing was not right to do it then.
I thought they had the right to vote for Mussolini.
They had the right to vote from Mussolini?
Right.
Okay. And in 1974, on this day, a grand jury in D.C. concluded that President Nixon was involved in the Watergate cover-up. Coming events for the history group. On March the 16th, our member Steve Bertha will be giving a talk about Hugo Chavez and the transformation of Venezuela. Steve has given us a number of presentations, and they're always really interesting. On April 16th, John Stewart will be giving a presentation on Jefferson and Monticello. Please feel free to join us on any of those. And now I'd like to introduce my co-chair, Dr. Ovid Vitas, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Mark. Jim Hauser is a member of the University Club of Winter Park and a graduate of the Boston University School of Law, as well as the Wharton School of Finances of the University of Pennsylvania, where he served as editor of the Wharton Account. Throughout his distinguished legal career, Jim has held several notable positions, including serving as county court judge for Orange County and later as a circuit court judge for Florida's 9th Judicial Circuit from 1990 to 2007. Currently, Jim is a principal at a consulting law firm specializing in writing and publishing materials for continuing judicial education. He is also an avid reader with a deep, long-standing interest in history and politics. So many of you may remember that Jim has spoken to the history group before, sharing his insights on President Johnson's 1948 other election, part 1. So today, as a continuation of that discussion, Jim will present the second part of his series, The Other 1948 Election, Lyndon Johnson's Race for the United States Senate, part 2. Please join me in welcoming Jim Hauser. Jim?
Can you hear me? Okay. All right. Lucy and Lori and Joan, you're going to be the Greek chorus. When I say Greek chorus, your job is to stand up or sit, as the case may be, and yell no. Okay? All right. All right. Okay. Well, that's the end of the lecture. We're going to have a lot of fun. This is not going to be your normal lecture. There's going to be a lot of Hauser players participating in this. And hopefully it's going to be a lot of fun and not go completely out of hand. As I say, this is almost the most exciting election ever. The only one that I think is more exciting was Gore versus Bush. But this is the election that almost never ended. Okay. All right. It's the 6th day after the election. Lyndon Johnson has lost. He's lost by 113 votes. But magically, in Jim Wells County in South Texas on the Rio Grande, someone has discovered a mistake. Luis Salas has discovered a mistake. Originally, according to his documentation, he had put down that Johnson had won the precinct 757 to 60. But no, he made a mistake, and he changed the 7 to a 9. This is 6 days after the election. So magically, Lyndon Johnson got an additional 200 votes, in alphabetical order, by the way. And he now wins by 87 votes. He's now the United States Democratic nominee for the United States Senate. The end. Greek chorus. No. Lori, you failed. No. Okay, yes. That's New Jersey for you. Okay. Now, I'm going to take you back a little bit, and for those of you who didn't attend the first lecture, in 1941, Lyndon Johnson ran for Senate. He won, but Pappy O'Daniel was able to steal more votes at the end of the election than Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson vowed, "I'll never be outstolen again." I'm not kidding. This is his perception of Texas politics, okay? Now, the person he's running against is Coke Stevenson. And I spent 15 minutes describing Coke Stevenson the last time we were here. This guy is Horatio Alger, Thomas Jefferson, Clarence Darrow, Gary Cooper, and Abraham Lincoln. He never went to school. He taught himself how to read. He learned how to build roads, like himself, how to build roads. He never went to law school, became one of the best trial lawyers in Texas. He studied government. He wanted to serve in government, not for power, but to make government work better. Absolutely dedicated to making government work. But for the fact that he was a white supremacist, he was an amazing man, but amazing man. Unbelievably honest, incredibly honest. And in fact, the reason he lost the election was because he was too honest. This is a titanic struggle for control of the Texas political system. On the left is Luke Skywalker, played by Coke Stevenson. On the right is Darth Vader, played by Lyndon Johnson. I have been told to explain that Darth Vader is not really the father of Lyndon Johnson, but I think you probably got that point. Okay. Sarah, you came late, but I need you to say, don't you hide. I need you to, you're part of the Greek chorus, so when I say Greek chorus, you say no, okay? Okay. Now this is the essence, the absolute essence of this titanic battle of who's going to be the nominee for U.S. Senate. Lyndon Johnson, it's existential that he be elected. If he's not elected, his dreams of becoming a president will be destroyed and shattered forever. For those of you who have read, by the way, this is the second volume of the Robert Caro books on Johnson. There's 4 of them. Keith has been reading the first one. He's been reading for 2 weeks. He's up to page 72. There's another 3,000 to go. This is the thinnest of the 4 volumes, and as you can tell, I've studied it pretty well. But these are incredible books. But the key to this is Johnson had to win. The key is power is oxygen. If he doesn't win it, he may die. So power is the essence of his being. Coke Stevenson, on the other hand, losing is existential. He believes in the majesty of the law. And he would never, he's a cowboy, a true cowboy, nobody steals from a cowboy. And no thief could ever be allowed to become a United States Senator. So for Johnson, it was winning. For Coke Stevenson, it was not allowing a thief to win. The majesty of the law is the essence of his being. Investigation at the OK Corral. Again, there are people, the Coke Stevenson people are saying, look, this is total BS. We know that Johnson has stolen the election. So he sends down two young lawyers to go down to Jim Wells County to inspect Precinct 13. And this is what happens. They go down and pretend that this is a statute book. It is a law book. Attorney's fees in Florida. Anyhow, pretend this is a statute book. And the attorney goes to the individual who's keeping the votes. According to statute 791.66, I'm entitled to look at those votes. And the individual goes, is this the statute? Yeah. I guess it doesn't apply down here. So they wouldn't let him look at the votes. Now, Coke Stevenson, tough as nails, decides he's going to have to go down there and inspect it himself. Mr. Darnold would not open the safe, so he has to do something. Yeah, I guess I gave you a hint as to my next statement. Who are you going to send down to Jim Wells County to be able to look at those votes? You're going to send the Texas Rangers, right? Not these Texas Rangers. Not these Texas Rangers. Coke Stevenson is going to go down there by himself. He doesn't need anybody else to help him. Well, he does. This is Frank Hamner. He's a former Texas Ranger. He was shot 17 times. He's killed 57 people, including Bonnie, of Bonnie and Clyde. He felt bad about that one. Tough as nails. And now we're going to have a little presentation. Don, if you'll get up, and Jay and Mark and Paul. Imagine the following. You stay there. Paul, you get over there. Let Paul go. That's right. All right. Now, all right. Don't these look like Mexican pistoleros? These guys have Mark, form a straight line. Get over here, Mark. Yes. Come up forward. All right. Now, you got to look mean and tough. They've got their hands on their pistols, waiting for anyone to make a move. Frank Hamner is got his hand on his pistol, and all of a sudden he starts saying, "Get." And there's this incredible tension. And what happens next? You're following. This is Coke Stevenson, by the way. You follow him. Go ahead. And like the Red Sea, they open up, and the thugs got getted. Anybody play Scrabble? All right. Is there such a word as getted? If there's a get, there's a get. Anyhow, and they pass through, and now, folks, thank you very much. So now Coke Stevenson is going to be able to open up the safe. And the first 842 names are in black ink. The next 200 names are in blue ink, in alphabetical order. And every one of those 200 names in alphabetical order voted for Lyndon Johnson. So Stevenson studies the poll sheet. He tries to memorize as many names as he can, but especially voter 842, because that was the last voter who voted. And they need to find out if anybody voted after voter number 842. So Coke Stevenson is trying to get affidavits. One of the rules in Jim Wells County is you're reluctant to testify in court. You tended to live longer if you don't testify. But he was able to get affidavits. Voter 842 said, no, there were no other voters after I left. He came in at 6:45. It's hard to believe that 200 voters came in at 6:45 and voted. He said, absolutely not. So he gets affidavits from some of the 200 voters some of whom who did not vote, and they will testify they did not vote, which gives a strong indication that these votes were stolen. The Democrat committee in Jim Wells County wanted to throw out the ballots. But Lyndon Johnson and his attorney came up with a much better idea. Chris Gambus, you appreciate this. In Austin, Texas, they get a judge to issue an injunction in another county. And the injunction says you can't open up the box without a court hearing. And the attorneys say, well, I don't want to obey a court order, even though it's clearly illegal. And so Johnson got his temporary restraining order that the Jim Wells ballots cannot be inspected until there's a full-blown hearing. The order is blatantly illegal, but it's still an order. Meanwhile, at the same time, we're now talking September 13th, and what is really, really important, incredibly important, is that the name on the ballot must be by October 3rd. Whether it's Coke Stevenson or Lyndon Johnson, that name has to be on the ballot by October 3rd, because if it isn't, then the Republican will be the only name on the ballot. So just think of the time period. We got a 20-day time period. Imagine that's what we've got. This is like a heavyweight fight, okay? Has anybody been to either a heavyweight fight or gone to a movie theater and watched a heavyweight fight? This is a really tame crowd. Wait, somebody said, anybody, raise your hand. Okay, one person, couple people. You know, in a heavyweight fight, they have an undercard. They have, another championship in the middleweight or light middleweight, and then the heavyweight fight. Well, this was as important as this election was for Lyndon Johnson. He's the undercard, not the main attraction. Because the main attraction was whether Harry Truman could be on the ballot. Because the state writers, the ones that walked out of the Democratic Convention in 1948 in Philadelphia, the state writers had taken control of the convention, and it was going to be crucial that they be replaced by people who were loyal to Harry Truman. So that's the main event. But, sometimes the middleweight fight is more exciting than the heavyweight fight. But the undercard is Johnson versus Coke Stevenson. The Fort Worth Convention wasn't held at a convention center. It was held at the Blackstone Hotel. And just imagine, like a heavyweight fight, a lot of smoke, not enough air conditioning, very dimly lit. People are perspiring, sweating. It's very, very, very intense. Now, on September 12th, the day before the convention, both Coke Stevenson and Lyndon Johnson are lobbying to get voters on their side. Lyndon Johnson is essentially saying this was the longest night of his life. Neither LBJ or Coke Stevenson who was winning. And Coke is trying to delay the convention so that the hearing in Alice, Texas can prove that Lyndon Johnson stole the election. LBJ brings in all of his big guns. He brings in Herman Brown. Herman Brown, Brown and Root, was the predecessor to Halliburton, one of the biggest contractors in Texas. And he put pressure on every single delegate. You want to get a crop loan next year, you vote for Johnson. You don't, we're going to foreclose on your property. That's a lot of pressure. And he had subcontractors do the same thing. Meanwhile, Coke Stevenson, they use a plane, they use the Brown and Root plane to pick up 3 delegates who weren't going to go to the convention to bring them to the Blackstone Hotel. Both sides are fighting for votes. Johnson is threatening people, and Coke Stevenson is saying, you need to do the right thing. We need honesty in politics, and Lyndon Johnson is the antithesis of that. One of the great quotes of Lyndon Johnson, his definition of an honest politician, is a politician who once bought, stays bought. In other words, I'm giving you $10,000, don't come back 2 days later and demand another $20,000 because you agreed to vote for the other guy for $15,000. That's his idea of an honest politician. Koch cannot, will not, ever allow Lyndon Johnson to steal the election. The tension in Fort Worth is palpable. I was talking to Sarah. I wish I had a machine that would go pound, 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 like a human heart, and your heart is beating 2 or 3 times the normal time period, because this is so tense. Somebody once asked John Connally, what was the scariest moment of your life besides being shot with John Kennedy? And he said, being shot with John Kennedy wasn't scary at all. I got shot, I didn't know what was happening. But the 1948 Democratic Convention was the scariest. Anybody play poker? I mean real poker. Ed? All right. I mean, as in, I'm going to bet my entire fortune, my IRA, my house, my firstborn, my parents' house, my parents' pension. That's how intense this was. He was terrified, and he had the additional terror of knowing that if he lost, he was probably going to jail for bribing voters. So for John Connally, this is not just existential, it is terrifying. Meanwhile, on the same day, in Jim Wells County, Stevenson is arguing to vacate, his attorneys are arguing to vacate the clearly illegal temporary restraining order gotten by Lyndon Johnson, who's accused Coach Stevenson of stealing the election. But the judge there is a tool of the boss of South Texas, which is George Parr, and he says, you know, I'm going to have to take this under advisement. I mean, this is too complex an area for me to rule on very quickly. The Coach Stevenson people are saying, this is ridiculous. An Austin judge doesn't have jurisdiction over Jim Wells County. Yeah, but it's not that clear cut, says the judge. So this is how intense everything is. LBJ argues, and this was something that was done by the state writers during the Jim Crow era. Courts have no jurisdiction to interfere into the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party is a private organization. As a result, only the Democratic Party can decide whether or not the votes were stolen. And only the Democratic Party can take evidence. So the state writers have pretty much precluded courts from interfering with Democratic shenanigans. The judge keeps the injunction. Again, this is September 13th, round 1, big win for Lyndon Johnson because precinct 13 box is not being opened up. Then at the Democratic convention, Coach Stevenson is saying, okay, Lyndon Johnson is not letting me present evidence in the state court proceedings. I want to present it to the Democratic committee. And there's 62 committee members. Any math majors in the audience? What's the majority of votes Johnson or Coach Stevenson needs to win the Democratic nomination? 32. Who said that? Very good. The gentleman with the mask who's very modest and didn't stand. Okay, so that's the magic number, 32. LBJ objects to the Democratic committee hearing this evidence and says, take it to court. You know, the court, I'm telling you, you can't present the evidence. Okay. The subcommittee decides it will not hear Koch's evidence. Big, big win for Lyndon Johnson. So after the second round, Johnson is definitely leading. But, oops. Whoa. The committee says we're not going to take any evidence, but we're not going to count Jim Wells County. Which means, if they're not counting Jim Wells County, Coach Stevenson has the most votes for senator, not Lyndon Johnson. This is a huge win for Coach. LBJ is terrified, and it's a huge win for Coach. This is a knockdown, not a knockout, but a knockdown for Coach Stevenson. He's now winning. The executive committee is 62. Jim Wells voters must be, and the issue before the Democratic committee, should the Jim Wells votes be counted? Time is of the essence, again, we're talking September 13th. Time is of the essence because somebody's name has to be on the ballot October 3rd. The voting begins. Lori and Ed, Delegate Sneed, fall on the floor. That's you, Ed. Quick. He's having a heart attack. And Lori Pearson Weiss, playing Alvin Wirtz, Johnson's attorney, is a true humanitarian. She provides him, take over there.
Oh my God.
This is terrible. Now, while he's on the floor, she makes him sign a proxy voting for Lyndon Johnson. And this is what the proxy looks like. And everybody agrees. That is absolutely Delegate Sneed's handwriting. It's, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a squiggle. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Ed. Yes. Now, and they're trying to bring doctors in and everything like that. Okay. So, Lyndon Johnson's attorney preserves at least one vote. Delegate Gibson, this was going to be Chris, but we couldn't find anyone else. Delegate Gibson is so scared of being on the losing side, he runs to the bathroom. He locks himself in a stall and refuses to come out because he doesn't want to be on the losing side. Okay? This is crazy, right? So, the voting begins. Stevenson, Johnson, Stevenson, Johnson. It's 28-10 for Coke Stevenson. But then the Johnson votes come in. And now it's 28-28. There's one vote left. Drum roll. The last vote is for Lyndon Johnson. He wins. Greek chorus. The end. Okay, very good. The end. No, because Lori, stand up. Ms. Dombrowski announces to the convention, you can't make this up. You're going to change your vote from LBJ to present. That wasn't exactly articulated.
Present.
All right.
I changed my vote.
Okay. She changes her vote. Now it's 28-28. And guess what? There's 5 delegates still out, but they're not at the convention. One's with his mistress. Another is at his daughter's wedding. And everybody is frantic, absolutely frantic with phone calls. But John Connally saves the day. How does he save the day? Are there any delegates in Fort Worth that anybody hasn't accounted for? Yes. Delegate Sneed in the bathroom. He goes to the bathroom, drags Sneed out. Sneed is putting up his pants as he's walking down the aisle, and he announces Johnson because John Connally has a gun pointed at his ribs. That's not true. But he announces Johnson. So Lyndon Johnson wins the Democratic convention, and that's how he becomes the nominee. Now, that's the end, right? Greek chorus? No. Okay, all right. Oh, we have more Greek chorus than I thought. Okay. Meanwhile, the next day is the historic vote on whether Harry Truman will be allowed to be on the Democratic ballot. In order to do that, they have to disenfranchise the Houston state riders. They do. Truman's going to be on the ballot. And in Tarrant County, the state-right delegates, they're so upset that they lost, they take the microphone, they take some of the chairs, they take the podium, and they take the organ. So the next day in the Dallas Morning News, you know the line, Ed, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. All right. As Tarrant County goes, so goes blah, blah, blah. So goes the furniture. The end. Oh, God, tough crowd. Coke Stevenson files suit in federal court. And he files suit in federal court, And he's not filing suit on behalf of Coke Stevenson. He's filing suit on behalf as an individual voter that his civil rights have been violated because Lyndon Johnson has stolen the election. Now, his attorneys have told him there's no way that a federal court, this is Justice Scalia is only 10 years old, whether federal courts can interfere in state elections. He was the decisive vote in Gore versus Bush. There's no way that the federal courts will ever accept jurisdiction to hear this race. But Coke Stevenson goes to Judge Davidson. He go to his ranch, and on the kitchen table, Judge Davidson signs an injunction keeping LBJ off the ballot, September 14th, until there's a hearing on whether or not the election is stolen. And the hearing on the injunction is set for September 21. That's only, 14 days before October 3rd. Now, Lyndon Johnson lawyers assure him there's no way that Judge Davidson will accept jurisdiction. At the opening statement, Coke Stevenson says, look, we're not talking fraud in Jim Wells County. We're talking fraud in Zapata County, fraud in Duval County, fraud all along the Rio Grande. We're not talking tens of votes, hundreds of votes. We're talking tens of thousands of votes. LBJ counters, well, Coke Stevenson committed fraud too. Okay, and Coke says, prove it. Never mind. Okay, so they argued that the federal court lacks jurisdiction. The Johnson attorneys are sure that the judge will not accept jurisdiction, and they're wrong. Davidson makes the following suggestion. He said, look, why don't we put both names on the ballot? Both Coke Stevenson and Lyndon Johnson will let the voters decide. Coke Stevenson says, absolutely, yes, I'm happy to do that. Lyndon Johnson goes, I need to talk about this with my lawyers. So, it's not clear whether he's going to accept the judge's suggestion. But what's really terrifying is the judge thinks he has jurisdiction, which means there's going to be a hearing, which means there's going to be evidence proving that Johnson stole the election. Johnson's legal team are the 10 best lawyers in Texas. And they're going, Lyndon, we've got a problem. And Johnson goes, what's the problem? We stole the election. How are we going to prove we didn't steal it when we stole it? And Box 13 is going to be open, and it's going to be terrible. And there's no possible way we can appeal this order prior to October 3rd. Johnson gets up, starts swearing and screaming and literally having a monumental temper tantrum. I won fair and square. 5 words. I won fair and square. None of those words are true. He didn't win. He didn't win fair. He didn't win square. He didn't win no way. He didn't win no how. He was absolutely terrified and scared. So what does Lyndon Johnson do? He says, get me, oops, I'm sorry. Before he says, get me, the hearing in Jim Wells County begins. The evidence is shown that the ballots will change from black to blue. Voter number 842 testifies that after he voted, he didn't see anyone else vote, which means the last 200 votes were fictitious. There's evidence from a handwriting expert that the 957 was changed from a 757. The lawyers object, speculation. The judge says overruled. Johnson is petrified. Voter 911. I was not in the county at the time of the vote. I didn't vote. The fact that you put down my name as a voter is fictitious. Voters from the other counties testified they didn't vote as well. It's going really bad for Lyndon Johnson. On September 22nd, now 11 days, 12 days before October 3rd, the judge lets the injunction stand. There's going to be no Democrat name on the ballot. LGJ counted that the court appoint a special master for Dallas because there's counties there where Johnson lost 10-1, and the judge said fine, but Johnson didn't pursue it. because Coke Stevenson didn't steal anything, because Coke Stevenson, number one, would not know how to steal, and number two, it would go against every essence of his being to steal. So at the moment, the ballot is for the Republican and no name for the Democrat. Get me Abe Fortas. Abe Fortas happens to be in Texas at the time. Abe Fortas is this Jewish attorney from the backwoods of Tennessee, has the highest grade Yale Law School has ever given to any student, just an incredibly brilliant mind. And Abe Fortas happens to fly over from Fort Worth to Austin to talk to the Texas team. And they said, "Do you have a suggestion?" And he said, "Yes." He suggests a huge gamble. We can't appeal to the entire Fifth Circuit on jurisdiction because they're not going to be able to rule on time. Now, does anybody who's a sports fan know what tanking is? This is not a sports crowd. Tanking, wait, don't nod your head, Jeff, and say yes. What is it?
It's losing deliberately to get a better place.
Yes, it's losing deliberately. You're going to argue before the judge, the single judge, but don't argue really strongly. Let the judge rule against you. Okay? And the reason you're going to do that is so that we can appeal this single judge's decision directly to the United States Supreme Court. Because if we don't get this judge to rule against you, we're never going to get the Supreme Court to be able to rule on the case. The 10 attorneys, the best lawyers in Texas, are in utter shock and awe. What a brilliant suggestion. None of them would have ever come up with it. Oops. LBJ appeals to the Fifth Circuit and goes in front of the judge least likely to grant his appeal. The judge says, "I will take it under advisement." LBJ's going ballistic. What do you mean under advisement? Just rule against me, damn it. Because we don't have time. The judge waits about 5 hours, writes a decision, ruling he is not dissolving the injunction. So now, LBJ is going to be able to appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And the justice who will be hearing this for the Fifth Circuit is Justice Hugo Black. Hugo Black was appointed by President Roosevelt. He's a big New Dealer. He knows Lyndon Johnson. He likes Lyndon Johnson. But there's going to have to be a hearing before Justice Black in order to determine whether or not the federal judge has jurisdiction. Okay? So, meanwhile, in Jim Wells County, subpoenas are being sent out to all the people involved in the election. This is a reverse immigration story because all the people in South Texas who are trying to be served with subpoenas have now moved to Mexico and can't be found. So it's September 27th, and on September 28th, there's going to be a hearing in Jim Wells County about precinct number 13, the missing box. So we're not very sophisticated in this presentation. We have dual hearings going on. On the right-hand side is the hearing in Alice, Texas, whether or not the votes were stolen. And then there's a hearing before Justice Black as to whether or not the federal court has jurisdiction. The attorneys make their arguments. In the Texas case, Luis Salas testifies, and he testifies, lo and behold, I've got 3 copies of the precinct voting. They were in the back of my car. They've been stolen. Somebody took these votes. I don't know who did it, but somebody stole it. Now, Chris, you know that if you've got evidence and you suppress that evidence or you try to conceal it, the evidence would then be assumed to be the worst case scenario for that individual. But nobody raised that point in Texas. I don't know why. Did anybody have any idea what I just said? No. Well, Chris does, and Ralph does. That's all that's important. All right, so he claimed that he doesn't have a copy of these votes, but they start taking testimony. And the federal master orders the production of box 13. So, arguments before black, arguments in Jim Wells County, everybody's heart is pounding 100 miles an hour. On September 28th, before the United States Supreme Court, Johnson makes his argument. His argument is jurisdiction. The federal court doesn't have jurisdiction. Coke-Stevenson argument is justice. Nobody should be allowed to steal an election. The courts must have the power to prevent that. LBJ's heart is racing. Meanwhile, in Jim Wells County, 18 boxes are brought in trying to find precinct 13. And some of them are locked. So the judge hires a locksmith to open up the boxes. And the votes are starting to be counted. And it's looking really, really bad for Lyndon Johnson. Justice Black makes a ruling. Well, he doesn't do so immediately. He takes it under advisement. And then he says, you know what? You're right, the federal court doesn't have jurisdiction. Abe, prepare an order for me, send it to me, I'll look at it, I'll make some changes, I'll sign it tomorrow. So the Johnson forces call Judge Davidson and say that Justice Black has ruled that the courts don't have jurisdiction. And what does Judge Davidson do? He says, we're going to continue with the hearing until I see a written order. So the LBJ lawyers are apoplectic, terrified. The boxes are open, box after box after box after box. But we haven't gotten to precinct 13. There's no poll tally lists in these boxes, so you're starting to have to count these votes by hand. And how do we know if these votes are even valid? Salas claimed that a box is shown, but Luis Salas, the one who was in charge of precinct 13, said, that's not the box. And the judge says, okay, we're going to continue the hearing to September 29th. The hearing continues. Boxes are being opened. And they're getting closer and closer and closer to the precinct 13 box. And just as they get to the precinct 13 box, Justice Black's order is faxed to Judge Davidson, and he tells the judges to stop the proceedings, and the boxes are not open, and Lyndon Johnson wins. The end, the end, the end. No Greek chorus. Johnson's name is put on the ballot box, on the ballot, and he wins the U.S. Senate vote. Okay, I mean, how do they not make a movie out of this? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Okay. They find the precinct 13 box 2 years later. There it is, if you can see it, precinct 13. Those are some of the players of the Mexican pistoleros showing box 13. This is a big joke for Johnson. At the first lecture, Louise will remember I talked about Steppenwolf. And Steppenwolf, how many of you remember reading Steppenwolf in high school or college? Okay. Steppenwolf is this mythical German being, half animal, half civilized, half intelligent, half barbarian, which was a perfect description of Germany, the most educated country in the world about to become a Nazi country, a Nazi barbarian country. But it also describes Lyndon Johnson. He did so much good and so much evil. This is Johnson signing the Civil Rights Bill. I am telling you, nobody could have gotten this bill passed except Lyndon Johnson. Nobody. The 64 Civil Rights Bill, the 65 Civil Rights Bill, Medicare, Medicaid, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Kennedy Center, the Trump Center. Truth in Lending, I made a living off of Truth in Lending. Truth in Packaging, the Fair Housing Act. All of these acts that are passed with the auspices of Lyndon Johnson. Public Broadcasting, Kathleen, which is important to me because my daughter is working for NPR. Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. All of these things are passed and wouldn't have been passed if Johnson had not been elected to the Senate. But Johnson's legacy also includes the credibility gap. Lyndon Johnson never told the truth. You know, prior to Lyndon Johnson, people believed the president. You would never speak disparaging that the president is lying. You know that he might be shading the truth for the good of the country, but not shading the truth just for the good of themselves. People believed in the presidency, and this is the beginning of where people lost faith in government. There were race riots. Americans were questioning about what is America about. Sounds familiar. And of course, Vietnam. Johnson knew as early as 65 or 66, correct me on this, Ed, I'm sure you will, that the war could not be won. 57,000 Americans lost their lives. Hundreds of thousands were injured or maimed or ruined for life. So that's LBJ's legacy as well. Now, can we think of somebody who is tenacious, win at any cost, I don't care? Can we think of a president who would be like Lyndon Johnson? Anybody have an idea? Yes, Donald Trump. And the irony of this is that everything that Johnson passed, Donald Trump is trying to destroy. Here's a quote from Lyndon Johnson that's sort of a joke. Democracy is a constant tension between truth and half-truth, and in the arsenal of truth, there is no greater weapon than fact. But fact and Johnson sometimes went hand in hand, but often did not. So, what happened to Louis Solis? Well, he hides into the sunset. Robert Caro, the author of this book, finds him in a California trailer park and said, "What happened?" And Louis Solis says, "I made the votes up. When I did the tally sheet, I never looked at the votes. I just kept saying Johnson, 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 Johnson. And you know what? I feel bad for Coke Stevenson, who lost." Okay. Coke Stevenson. Now, he's upset that he lost, but he's much more upset that Johnson won, because the majesty of the law, the rule of law, was destroyed. He's a widower, and he meets the clerk of the court. Her name was Teeny. Coke Stevenson, 6'3", 230 pounds, looks like a linebacker, still at the age of 60. He would work on his ranch from sunup until sundown with nary a break, just built like a rock. And this little tiny woman is attracted to him, and he's attracted to her, and they fall in love. One of the great love stories, other than Audrey and Jim Hauser, one of the great love stories of all time. And his nephew said, "The best thing that happened to my Uncle Coke is that he lost the election, because he was able to find love." Now, the end. I don't want to hear anything from any Greek chorus. Coke Stevenson rides into the sunset, a cowboy to the end. By the way, at the first lecture, for those of you who attended, Coke Stevenson builds his own house, doesn't hire a contractor, as in he builds his own house. But he didn't have plumbing, and he absolutely refused to have a telephone. Well, Coke and Teeny have a daughter, and at the age of 16, the daughter demands a telephone. Well, nobody pushes Coke Stevenson around except a 16-year-old teenage daughter, and they get a telephone. The end. Thank you.
All right. Well, I have a question coming up here.
Lori's stand up. She wants to get her due as being one of the great actors of this piece.
That was wonderful, Jim. That was really wonderful. As I mentioned, and you yelled at me last time that I mentioned this, but Coke Stevenson never voted for a Democrat again after this.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Yes. Anybody else? Yes.
Rutschman.
This is the gentleman that knew that 32 was a majority. Yes.
Very hard. I don't understand the connection between the primary vote and the convention vote. Were the convention delegates bound by the primary or not?
The convention vote would decide who won the primary. They were the ultimate arbitrators of that. So if the convention said that Coke Stevenson won, then he would be the Democratic nominee. If the Democratic convention said that Lyndon Johnson won, he would be the Democratic nominee. Does that answer your question?
Sure, so were they like the judges of the election, of the primary? In that?
Yeah, but it, it's like any other convention.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Well, I think one of the best lectures I've ever heard, and just what hit me,
And Randy, I will pay you the
yeah, Venmo, let's use Venmo. And it just what
Randy,
hit,
I don't
what
use
hit,
Venmo.
pardon?
You take checks?
No. What century are you living in? We don't use paper anymore. What hit me was how this little incident had changed the course of history. What would have happened had LBJ never,
That's the-
one little thing.
Yes, that's the whole point. And Sarah, do you want to comment on that? Sarah does not want to comment on it. That's what by the way, I want to thank Sarah Hansen. She helped me with the presentation.
Bravo, Sarah.
She absolutely helped me with the spelling and some of the ideas. But that's the ultimate question. If you want power, what length are you willing to go to get it? And of course, nobody wants you to steal elections. But what if this was Adolf Hitler? Would you be willing to steal an election to prevent Hitler from becoming chancellor in Germany? And these are tough questions. Well,
Terrific lecture, best legal lecture I've ever heard, I think, but,
it says a lot about how bad legal lectures
yeah,
are.
well, there's some truth to that. But anyway, being a tech lawyer, I couldn't help but see one obvious inaccuracy in your facts. There was no fax machine. So how did they get Justice Black's order to Texas? You can't telegraph it. There were wires, but there were no fax machines. They were invented in the late 70s. I represented, my firm did, the company that had the patent, so you're definitely wrong.
They would have used telephone.
I thought fax machines came out very early.
No, late 70s. And even then, who wants to buy one fax machine? You need two.
You know what?
Took them a long time
Ralph,
to get.
Ralph,
There were fax machines with photographs. So you get fax, facsimile
I used
of
to
a
use
photograph
telex.
in the 30s. There was no fax machine.
well, okay. I will go with, there was something, and somebody received the written order. We don't know how. It was magic. Yes, Ann?
No, I was going to say that, newspaper business, et cetera, they had a telex system that wasn't fax, but close to it.
1924.
Yeah.
Ah.
So,
24.
What?
Not
And-
in fact, it says RCA transmits a photo of President Calvin
Yeah.
Coolidge from New York to London via radio waves in 1924.
Yeah.
And then there was some technology between 1902 and 1908.
Somehow,
yes.
we're
yes.
losing the big point
Yes,
here.
yes.
Justice Black's order somehow was received in Texas.
It was radio transmitted, or wire transmitted. So the,
What's the question then?
so the irony, so many ironies, but the irony about LBJ and Vietnam is in 1950, when was he Senate Majority Leader?
56? 53.
53. Okay, 1954, he prevented the Dulles Eisenhower administration from joining the Brits to save the French after Bien Bien Phu. He did not want the United States to enter that war, and he prevented it.
That's an irony. Yes, sir.